We're talking gravel bikes, but not everyday gravel bikes. Not those type of gravel bikes that have mounting points that could carry a year's worth of hipster camping gear to take you out into the woods for one single night. We're talking about gravel bikes that are meant to go fast and do skids and do jumps and go as fast as you can when you pin a number on. Today we're talking about the Cervelo Aspero. Hit me with that big, beautiful B-roll. All right, I'm kidding. If you want to go bike pack, totally fine. There's tons of great options out there for you if you're looking for a bike to carry all of your gear out to your campsite and have a good time. The Aspero from Cervelo might not be the best one. Cervelo is one of those brands that I think does something incredibly well. They filter everything that they make through a single filter. Their brand's mission statement, which is to make riders faster. If you're looking for a bike that is going to go fast, whether it is a Tour de France race bike or something with big chunky tires like the Aspero, they've done such a great job of building the bike with that idea in mind, making sure that every feature that they add goes into making that bike perform and go fast around corners and straights over any terrain. And I think that's one of the reasons why when the Aspero was launched in 2019, their tagline, "Haul ass, not cargo," really hit so perfectly. They had built a bike that wasn't trying to be everything to everyone. It was trying to be, very specifically, a bike to go fast. All right, so who is the Aspero for? Flat out, it is for a rider who wants to go fast. This means that you're looking for speed, you're likely someone who wants to go race, and if you're not racing and pinning a number on or going to a gravel event, something like the Grasshopper Series here in Northern California, you're out there racing your buddies or trying to go fast on all the roads around your place. This rider is all about trying to get performance, handling, and speed out of the bike they're on. Very specifically, this bike is built to be the best race machine you could have for anything from Unbound out in Kansas to your local gravel race that's in your hometown. This bike is all about going fast and not being the extremes of what gravel riding could be. Let's start talking a little bit about the bike, and let's kick it off with how they started by designing the Aspero. So when you think about the problem of designing a fast gravel bike, there are a lot of things that need to come into play. For one, Cervelo realized that there is a large, undamped force that comes from the tires. Road bikes have very small tires that ultimately don't have much play. It allows you to really build all of the performance characteristics you want out of the frame. If the frame performs one way, it's likely going to perform that way across all situations. Gravel bikes are a little different. As you start going up in tire size to big volume, you start ending up with a very undamped spring on the bottom of the bike, which can make the bike feel sluggish. It can make the bike handle poorly because it pushes into corners. It can really change the characteristics that the engineers intended with the frame. So with that said, when Cervelo started designing the Aspero, they actually upped all of their performance targets, meaning that they increased the stiffness targets to make sure that they were able to overcome anything that happened from that undamped spring. Those same big tires that ultimately give you great compliance when you're on rough terrain also act as a lever arm. Bigger the lever arm, the more force that can be exerted on the bike. So again, when you start thinking about building bigger performance targets or building more stiffness into the frame, now you've also got more leverage that is acting on the bike. And if we're looking for a bike that's going to perform well and handle well, we need to make sure that the bike is going to be rigid so it can go around corners without having wheel deflection, and so that you're able to pedal it and feel like you're actually riding a performance bike. So Cervelo wanted to make a bike that didn't feel too far from your normal road bike. So I'm gonna compare a lot of the numbers in terms of geo to the R5. The R5 is their ultralight race bike. When we talk about some of those numbers, I'll try to do my best to explain what those do in terms of affecting the geo. So the first thing that we're gonna talk about is trail. The measurement of trail comes from if you were to draw a straight line through the bike's head tube down to the ground, and then a straight line from the bike's front axle down to the ground. And it is the measure between those 2 points. A bike that has more trail will typically be more stable at high speeds. So for gravel riding, Maybe a bike with a little bit more trail is going to be better so that as you're bouncing over hard terrain or rocks or things like that, you don't get thrown off course. Whereas on a road bike, for example, something like the R5, you might want a little less trail because that'll translate into a bike that feels more nimble, more quick. So compared to the R5, the trail of the Aspero is about 1.3 millimeters more, meaning that we've got a bike that is going to handle with a little bit more stability than that of a true road bike. That small distance really does translate to a lot more stability, and especially when you start to pair that with a much bigger tire. The next thing is head tube angle. And so in this specific application, a bike with a slacker head tube angle is going to typically be more stable in rough terrain. Now, when we think about all of the gravel bikes out on the market, there are some bikes that are actually pushing this pretty extreme. Bikes that have head tube angles that are really slack, something like you'd see on a trail style mountain bike. And for those, that's for one specific type of riding. If you want to be able to hit corners out on a trail, that long or slack front end really helps you get more bite on the front end of the bike and allows you to use a lot of those cornering knobs. Now, if you're racing and if you're out on gravel roads, you really want the bike to handle much more like a road bike. It is good to have a little bit slacker of a head tube angle so that if you hit a big bump, your wheel doesn't deflect and come off where you're trying to head. But for the most part, you want to have a bike that's going to be pretty similar to your road bike. So compared to an R5, again, using that as our example, you're about 1 degree slacker than a typical road bike. The other thing that we want to talk about is the bike's overall wheelbase. And there are kind of two pieces to that equation. How far from the bottom bracket the front wheel is and how far from the bottom bracket the rear wheel is. With a gravel bike with big tires, we want to make sure that we don't have toe overlap. So in this case, we want to make sure that we have a long enough front center that you don't touch your toe. And we also want to have a roomy enough cockpit so that you can be comfortable on the bike. So in this case, Cervelo has pushed out the front center to make sure that we avoid any toe overlap, but still give enough room to breathe and to be able to turn the handlebar with a relatively short stem so that we can overcome some of that cornering force. On the back end of the bike, or the chainstay length, the rear center refers to the distance between the bottom bracket and the rear axle. The longer that is, the more stable the bike will feel. The counter to that means that the more stable the bike is, the harder it's going to be to get to go around a corner. So if you get into really tight switchbacks or a trail or something that really has tight corners, a long bike isn't going to be as easy to get around those types of corners. In this case, it's only about 10 millimeters longer than a standard road bike, which is still in that realm of normal for a bike. It's going to allow you to have tight handling in rough terrain, but it's also going to provide some added stability if you get into some bigger bumps. All right, let's talk features. This bike's got a ton of different things going on, so let's start with wheel size and the ability to switch between them. So with bikes, they're typically designed around one specific wheel size, and if you switch to another, in this case 700C or 650B, you probably destroy how the bike rides. Cervelo has come out with a clever solution to be able to switch between the two wheel sizes, and you'll notice it in the front fork. There is a small chip that allows you to move the front axle fore and aft. In the front position, you can run it for 700C, and in the back position, it works with 650B. What that does is allow you to keep the same geometry numbers to make sure that the bike handles the same regardless of your wheel size. If we're talking about wheels, we should probably just go ahead and talk about tires right now. So tires are another big thing. Tires control so much of how a bike rides. If you've got a big volume tire, you're gonna have a lot more compliance. If you've got a smaller tire, you might have a faster feeling, but at the same time, you're gonna give up some of that compliance. This bike on a 700C wheel is able to fit up to a 42C tire, so really big. And if you're on 650B wheels, you can fit all the way up to a 49C tire. All right, so now let's talk aerodynamics. Yes, aerodynamics on a gravel bike with enormous balloon-style tires. But let's think about it actually here. When you're racing a gravel race, something like Unbound, for example, you're out there for like 12 hours. And if you're riding a bike for that long, any little benefit starts to add up and become a really big thing. So in this case, Cervelo's done a great job of borrowing tubes from their other bikes. So bikes like the R5, which have some really clever aerodynamic shaping of the tubes that they use on it, they've taken those and brought them over to the Aspero. So while it may not be a full-on aerodynamic road bike like the S5, you do get a lot of that advantage that starts to add up, especially in long races. So we can't talk about aerodynamics without talking about the integrated cockpit. This is also probably a good time to bring up the fact that there are two different Asperos. There is the Aspero and the Aspero-5. The Aspero is the standard bike that uses a standard front end. It has cables that come off the bar and route into the frame. The Aspero-5 features Cervelo's integrated cockpit. And in this case, it has a handlebar that allows for routing underneath the bar, not through it, which makes it really, really easy to build, and then goes into the stem and through the headset. You get a very clean front end that is not only aerodynamic from hiding all of those cables, but also keeps the bike clean from dirt. And if you're gonna go fast on gravel, you should probably have some protection. So if you look on the bottom of the bike, you'll also see that there is a big, thick TPU protection panel that protects the bottom bracket. So if you're cruising along at 30 miles an hour on gravel and a big old rock comes up and hits you, it's not gonna break your $5,000 carbon frame. No tears, perfect. It's the solution we all needed. All right, so let's wrap this thing up and talk a little bit about the models and the spec. So price range for Aspero starts around $3,100 and moves all the way up past $10,000, as most bikes do these days. But the bike that I seem to like the most comes in with the standard Aspero, not the integrated front end, and has a rival kit on it. And it also comes with the Reserve 32 carbon wheels. Those wheels are fantastic. They're a 32 millimeter deep wheel, carbon fiber, and they've got a very wide inner diameter, so 24 millimeters internal, which allows you to have a lot more volume inside of the tire. So even if you're running a thinner, 33 or 35 millimeter tire, you end up with a really large volume of air, which helps with the compliance of the bike and makes it have a nice and sporty feel. All right, that is it. That's all we've got on the Cervelo Aspero. If you are into racing, if you want to go fast, I think this is probably the best gravel bike in the world for you. If you are looking for a little more utility, something that is going to get you out with your camping gear and get you lost in the woods and fending off bears with your bare hands, probably not the right bike. If you got any other questions, feel free to get in touch with our online sales team. Those guys are wizards. They will be able to answer any question that I did not. I probably confused you all, so maybe just give them a call anyway. Even if you feel like you've got everything, talk to them. Bye.